Gabon's government foils a coup, but with the president on medical leave and no clear successor, is the Bongo dynasty on the verge of collapse? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Ali Bongo. For now, everything seems under control. Just days after soldiers attempted to seize power in Gabon, they claimed the president is no longer fit to rule. But they didn't get very far. Within hours, 2 were dead and 8 others have been arrested. But while the government says all is well, from the outside looking in, it doesn't look that way. President Ali Bongo is in Morocco after having a stroke. And for many Gabonese, everyday life is a struggle. 1/3 of its population lives in poverty despite great oil wealth. So is it time Ali Bongo says goodbye? And if he doesn't, is it only a matter of time until he's forced to? That debate in a moment, but first here's Natalie Perhonen.
The situation is under control. That's the message the Gabonese government gave its people after a coup attempt in the capital. On Monday, a group of soldiers took to the airwaves, calling on the public to overthrow President Ali Bongo.
As part of an operation called Operation Dignity, the movement is asking all young people from the defense and security forces and all Gabonese youth to join us.
Within hours, the armed forces had regained control. But the attempt is a visible sign all is not well in Gabon. The president hasn't stepped foot in his country in more than 2 months. He's in Morocco recovering from a stroke. Just days before the coup attempt, he released his New Year's speech, his first public address since October.
Je continuerai à mettre toute mon énergie et toutes mes forces au service de notre pays et à l'amélioration de nos conditions de vie au quotidien. À nouveau, je vous souhaite à tous et à toutes une excellente année 2019, faite de joie et de prospérité pour notre pays.
On the streets of Libreville, his absence is clear. While Gabonese people didn't support the move to seize power, some say they can understand why it happened.
We never said that this is what we wanted. But if this is happening, it's because, well, people don't just wake up one morning and decide to have a coup d'etat. It means there are things in this country that are not working.
We are tired of remaining in doubt, uncertainty, and we are all expecting straight answers from our president, if he is still able to assume his duties.
The Bongo family has ruled for 5 decades. Ali took over from his father in 2009. Gabon is Africa's 5th largest oil producer, but the benefits haven't trickled down to everyone. About 1/3 of people live below the poverty line. Reducing inequality is one of the country's greatest political challenges. For now, though, it's government as usual. In November, the Constitutional Court transferred some of the president's powers to the Prime Minister and the Vice President. The coup attempt may have been thwarted quickly, but Bongo's continued absence is contributing to a degree of unrest. Natalie Perhonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by journalist and blogger Papa Ismaila Dieng in Senegal's capital, Dakar. David Kiwuwa is an associate professor of international studies at the University of Nottingham's Ningbo campus in eastern China. And Mehari Tadele Maru is a security consultant and former African Union official who joins us from Nairobi. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. David, I want to begin with you. Obviously, the coup attempt was foiled, but there's still very big questions about the future of the Bongo dynasty and Gabon. What's the biggest question for you right now?
Well, thanks again for having me. It's a very interesting development in Gabon, and it looks like the political tensions have been basically festering for a long period of time. And therefore, the coup itself was much more basically a tip point of the kind of festering anxiety that has been existing in Gabon for quite a period of time, particularly since the 2016 elections. Now, the coup has happened, it has failed, and what does that mean? I think what it means going forward is an opening shot to basically send a signal that it may not necessarily be business as usual. This coup has failed, but who knows, maybe the next one may not fail. But at the same time, it may not necessarily be a coup itself, but rather sending a signal that there is a need for change, and that change perhaps should not be far away in the future.
Papa Ismaila Dieng, did the coup fail because the coup plotters were disorganized and not properly prepared, or because they didn't really have a lot of support among the people? Which one was it?
Thank you. I think it's mainly because they wasn't prepared enough and they didn't have enough support in the army, mostly. They asked people to go out, but people wasn't safe and secure enough to go out.
Right.
People are very shot when they go out. So they needed first very big support from inside the army, and then after they should have the popular support from people. Like you in the image we see, you see how military are facing people. So people are not ready to go out for that. And the moment they choose, like people were sleeping, and the guy said, if you were sleeping, wake up. The people who were sleeping cannot hear him. I don't know if you, and that's for me the main problem. They wasn't prepared enough for that.
Okay, so Mehari Tadele Maru, Ali Bongo survived the coup attempt, but he's not well, and there have been many huge questions hanging over his leadership and the entire government. Do you agree with David that this might just be an opening shot and there might be more to come?
I believe David is on spot when he says that the politics in Gabon will not be the same since this coup attempt. Regardless of the level of authority and position of the coup authors, this has signaled that the public in general and within the army also for the first time, there is elements of the army that are dissatisfied with the current dynastic leadership of Ali Bongo, and also the continuation of that family for the past 50 years or so. So this is a big opening in addition to the pressure that was mounting since the last election with the opposition led by Jinping, who almost lost for less than 5,000 votes, if you wish. So that is a very significant event that the existing regime cannot continue with the kind of legitimacy deficit it's facing unless some course is changed in addressing the fundamental legitimacy questions that are being raised on Ali Bongo's regime.
Right. David, those who were involved called themselves the Patriotic Youth Movement of the Gabonese Defense and Security Forces. The government has tried to trivialize them, belittle them, said they're basically nothing and they will have no impact. And within all the chaos and the turmoil, there were many people calling for Jinping as an alternative to Ali Bongo. Tell me how the two match and whether this is perhaps an opening for people calling for Mr. Ping to be their legitimate leader.
I think what the coup did and the junior officers who led, I think the very failure of the coup signaled that they did not have the support of the upper ranks of the military establishment. But at the same time, as you did point out, that the coup leaders seem to be appealing to the rather disaffected youth in Gabon who are living in dire poverty, despite the fact that the country is one of the biggest oil producers in Africa, for that matter. But then again, of course, the issue of Jinping, whether he's an alternative leader, was already answered at the ballot box. The fact that he came to, as the previous speaker said, came within 5,000 votes of upsetting the status quo does point that he's a really credible alternative leader. I mean, he has the pedigree of having been in the Bongo dynasty cabinet for quite a very long period of time. He served in the African Union for a significant period of time. So he's garnered a degree of credentials that would offer him as a credible alternative to the Bongo dynasty. And therefore, going forward, it is a question of time, of if the next elections run, is it rather that it will be third time lucky that actually this time he may come through? Specifically, if he appeals to the very big disaffected youth who are suffering from high levels of unemployment.
Is Mr. Ping, Papa, a credible alternative to Bongo if things happen to drift in that direction?
The first problem is Ping is a member of the Bongo dynasty. He had been married to Pascaline Bongo, who is Ali Bongo's sister. They have 2 or 3 kids, I don't know. And the main problem in Gabon is that it's a familial problem people are trying to solve politically. At one moment, Ping disagreed with the rest of the family, and he went out and trying a bit an opponent. He had been in the system with Ali Bongo's father for years and years. He had been a long time foreign affairs minister. So, in some Gabonese people, he is not really a real alternative. It would just be the same dynasty, just changing their skins, turning the other side of peace. So the people are trying really to find another one alternative, but if they don't have, let's say, if they don't have the choice, they will go with Jianping and trying now to constrain him to do what people are expecting from them.
Understood. Let's look at some of the bigger bodies here. The African Union. Mehari, as somebody who was formerly in a role with the AU, as they saw the events unfolding with the now foiled coup in those corridors of power in Addis Ababa, how would they have been reacting? Would they have been making contingency plans and thinking about possible alternatives?
No, I don't think so. The first one is we have already well-established system of response to coup d'etats. The first one is there is no bad or coup d'etat. All coup d'etats are bad. That is very important in terms of ensuring legitimacy. You cannot have a very useful fruit from a poisonous tree. Basically, coup d'etats are poisonous in Africa. Historically, they were devastating and disastrous, and they have to be avoided at all costs. So the AU has taken a very progressive, though some of the leaders have come to power through coup d'etat, but they want to end it with that. So there is a marriage of convenience here, but it's very useful for Africa that there is no coup d'etat, there should be an end to coup d'etat. The second fundamental question is not about alternative, whether Mr. Jinping will be a good alternative or not. The first question is, where do we stand now in terms of constitution in Gabon? The constitution is not a constitution that allows for legitimacy to be enshrined in the governance system. So we have to address the constitutional shortcomings that are existing now, which entrenches existing incumbent government and could allow the dynasty to continue. As such, there is no problem if the elections were to be conducted under a very refined and democratic constitutional system. So the first question is the constitution. Now, the constitution has to be reformed. Of course, the response towards the coup d'etat from AU is clear. That is a total rejection, as the chairperson rightly and immediately responded through his Twitter handle. But the question of legitimacy remains there, that there is a need for reform in the constitution, that there is a need for the public participation in election that is credible, both credible inside in the country by the public and credible outside by international community, including the African Union and other regional economic communities as they participate in the observation. Like I said, the difference between Ali Bongo in the last election and Mr. Jinping is very, very narrow. That aside, there were a lot of questions about the credibility of the election. What this coup d'etat does is basically, regardless of its success or failure, is that coup d'etats always trigger a political discussion, a political big image problem for the existing dynasty, and they have to be addressed now. The legitimacy gap has to be addressed now before they get out of control, given that also the incumbent is not in a very good health to ensure a smooth running of the government, and later on also reform of constitutional level, and then the electoral arrangement that exists. It's only through this that you will have alternative that is credible and of the people, for the people and by the people.
David, failed coup d'etats also usually trigger crackdowns. We saw the internet was shut down in the aftermath of this. Are we to expect the Bongo dynasty to tighten its grip over the next few months?
I guess that is only natural. There's going to be an interesting review of whether they had collaborators beyond the junior officers, and that they may want to be mopping up to make sure that such things or such attempts do not happen again. But to come back to the issue of succession and alternatives, I would like to believe that long incumbents, if we look at Zimbabwe, if we look at Congo, DRC, what has happened is that our long-term presidencies have always sought to have our in-house succession systems. So in Zimbabwe, they wanted to get somebody from the Mugabe's ZANU-PF regime. In the DRC, we have seen Shadri being nominated and being pushed or scouted as the successor to Kabila. So I suspect that going forward, the reality is that Ali Bongo has been, the health, the stroke is going to have a lasting impact on his robustness and health. And therefore, also reflecting on the fact that he almost lost the election. And I would like to remind the viewers here that while people may say that those elections were not very credible, well, I think Jinping came very close to winning. And therefore, it does show that to some degree, there was an element of credibility. I mean, that is a question of degree. So there was an element of credibility that almost afforded Jinping, an ability to win. So in that respect, I think Ali Bongo may try and will try to know that the clock is ticking, and therefore it is time for him to look within his party to find whether they can designate a successor who is able to safeguard not only his legacy, but also the entire factionary of this party if going forward.
Papa Ismaila Dieng, all things considered, talking about the clock ticking, when we look at the economy, it's not doing too well. A lot of people are still in poverty despite all this massive oil wealth, and there's restlessness within the army, as we've seen. Has Ali Bongo passed his sell-by date?
No, I think the problem right now is that the Bongo dynasty is trying to find the better way to get out of all of this. The first thing is they are going to find traitors in the army and in the political sectors. The other thing now is to appoint the best successor to keep the power into their hands. And Ali Bongo, I think, will never come back to the power. I think that he's not going well enough to be back in Gabon as president. That's my opinion. The other problem is there will be maybe a little war into this family, because remember when Omar Bongo passed away, the question was, who will be the successor? Would it be Pascaline? Would it be Pascaline's husband? Or would it be Ali Bongo? And then it was Ali Bongo. And I think that Pascaline and other people did not really forget their ambition to be in charge one day.
Okay. Gentlemen, it's been good to talk to all of you. Thanks for helping us gain deeper insight into what's going on in Gabon. Papa Ismaila Dieng, David Kiwuwa, and Mehari Tadele Maru. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come, a birthday in Beijing. Kim Jong-un makes a surprise visit to China just days after warning Washington to ease sanctions. Will North Korea force the US to take notice? And put your money where your faith is. Germany considers introducing a tax for being Muslim. But will it work to counter extremism? 2018 was a huge year for North Korea. For the first time in the history of the Hermit Kingdom, its leader met a sitting US president. It ended with Kim Jong-un promising to denuclearize and establish new relations with Washington. But it hasn't exactly gone to plan. Last week, Kim warned Pyongyang would seek an alternative course if the US maintained its sanctions. So when he turned up in Beijing this week, it looked like he may have already started. And with a second Trump summit in the pipeline, could Kim now have the upper hand? Sandra Gatman reports.
Smiles, waves, even a motorcade. Kim Jong-un's trip to China this week was unusually hyped. And not just because it was his 36th birthday. It was the North Korean leader's 4th state visit to Beijing, though previous trips were unannounced and understated. This one seemed intended for the cameras.
On the one hand, North Korea's strategic dialogue with China can be seen as an effort towards denuclearization. On the other hand, it can be seen as a message towards the United States that if they do not show active participation in the negotiations, North Korea will recover its conventional ties with China and manage to endure.
A second round of talks between North Korea and the U.S. are likely on the cards this year.
We've really established a very good relationship. A lot of good things are happening. And so I look forward to our meeting with Chairman Kim. We'll set that up. We'll be setting it up in the not-too-distant future.
But each side needs more from the other. The U.S. wants greater assurances that Pyongyang will stop pursuing nuclear weapons, even though North Korean officials say they've demolished missile testing sites. North Korea wants Washington to drop sanctions it's imposed through the UN, which have squeezed its already weak economy. Just days ago, Kim Jong-un warned Donald Trump not to test his patience.
앞으로도 언제든 또다시 미국 대통령과 마주 앉을 준비가 되어 있으며 반드시 국제사회가 환영하는 결과를 만들기 위해 노력할 것입니다. 다만 미국이 세계 앞에서 한 자기의 약속을 지키지 않고 우리 인민의 인내심을 오판하면서 일방적으로 그 무엇을 강요하려 들고 우연히 공화국에 대한 제재와 압박으로 나간다면 우리로서도 어쩔 수 없이 부득불 나라의 자주권과 국가의 최고 이익을 수호하고 조선반도의 평화 안정을 이루기 위한 새로운 길을 모색하지 않을 수 없게 될 수도 있습니다.
That new path or partner could very well be China, North Korea's closest ally and economic lifeline. The two have patched up after relations soured when China joined international calls for North Korea to drop its nuclear program. And there's something in it for Beijing too. The US and China are engaged in a heated trade war, and having the ear of one of America's biggest enemies could be used as leverage against Trump. Kim Jong-un's private train has already left China. A quick trip that's got everyone talking. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined now from Augusta in the U.S. state of Georgia by Han Park. He's the founding director of the Center for the Study of Global Issues. In Washington, we have Bruce Klingner. He was the CIA chief of the Korea branch and is now a senior research fellow for Korean affairs at the Heritage Foundation. And in Beijing is Kiwuwa, a political analyst specializing in Chinese affairs. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Bruce, let me start with you. How would they be receiving and viewing the images and the news of Kim going to Beijing? In Washington, how would they see this?
Well, I think it's another indication that there will be a U.S.-North Korea summit perhaps in the next few months. National Security Advisor Bolton had said last month that the president wants to have one in January or February, despite the lack of progress. And the president had said they're discussing venues. So this could be, as Kim's father often did, going to Beijing to coordinate plans and policies before a big summit, either with South Korea or with the U.S.
So, Bruce, why is Beijing needed to sort of pave that way before a summit?
Well, I think North Korea always wants to coordinate with China to sort of hope that Beijing has their back, and perhaps a signal to Washington that even if the U.S. doesn't remove sanctions or have the UN remove sanctions, that North Korea may reach out more to China, hoping to get economic benefits, although, of course, most of the benefits would be constrained by UN or U.S. sanctions.
Shu Kin-duo, does North Korea have the support of China?
Well, I think, of course, for Kim and reaching out to China, he needs a coordination in terms of the policy toward the U.S., toward the dialogue with President Trump. And also, I think China will give him the support and also encourage him to go ahead to find a solution with Washington to, say, like destroy all the nuclear weapons, to bring peace and stability to the Korean Peninsula, which is also being sought after by North Korea in order to develop their economy.
Han Park, is it the right move to go to China before a potential summit with the U.S. again?
I think for the interests of North Korea itself, this is a very clever move. North Korea has always been dealing with the superpowers, the Soviet Union in the past and China at the same time. But now, in order to maximize benefit for China, for North Korea, Pyongyang has always maneuvering between the two superpowers in the past. Now it's their best interest, they think, to get closer to China and the United States at the same time. But it doesn't take a whole lot to make a good relationship with China because it has already established ideologically, culturally, politically, they are very close. Whereas North Korea and the United States is a long way to go. But I think that this is a good effort on the part of Kim Jong-un to maintain good relations continuously with China and exploring better relations with the United States at the same time. That's what he is doing at this time.
So, Bruce, China has complied with those UN Security Council sanctions on North Korea. At the same time, they want them relaxed. At the same time, they're North Korea's biggest trading partner. Has China been a bit of a maverick and a source of frustration for the Trump administration when it comes to North Korea?
China's implementation of required sanctions has been cyclical. Usually after a North Korean nuclear test, Beijing's rhetoric will become stronger. It will, for several months, enforce required sanctions to a higher degree, and then over time it tends to slide. And that's what we've seen after, say, the January 2016 summit. Nuclear test. Now we've seen increased reporting about more trade along the border between North Korea and China. We've had numerous reports of Chinese ships and offshore ship-to-ship oil transfers in violation of sanctions. So, and certainly Beijing, along with Moscow and Seoul, are advocating a relaxation of UN sanctions, although North Korea hasn't really taken any significant denuclearization steps.
Can I respond to that? I think there's, like my colleague pointed out, a lot of reports, but it's not only based on facts, let's say, whether China or South Korea or any other country has violated the UN resolution. And also, I think people should remember the ultimate goal of a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula is shared by China and the United States. To some extent, you can also say by North Korea and South Korea, of course, Japan too. So I think the goal for China is very clear. That is, China will not allow North Korea will be armed with nuclear weapons because China sees that as against its own national interests. So any reports of like China violating UN resolution, I think is not based on the fact because it's not serving the Chinese interests. And also, if you look at, people say, the peace process has been stalled, there's no progress. But look, after the summit in June between Kim Jong-un and Trump, Kim Jong-un has destroyed some of its facilities, and also has stopped its nuclear and missile tests. So what has the U.S. done? U.S., yes, suspended the military exercise with South Korea, but it can resume immediately at any time. So everybody is blaming North Korea for not disarming completely. But if you look at the statement, look at the joint statement between the two leaders last June, this last one page, right? It's not a full page. It's very simple. That is, they want to develop a new relationship. So what is a new relationship? That means like, kind of like equality. North Korea will not create trouble for the U.S. The U.S. will say not like impose more sanctions or strangle this country. So basically, for North Korea, they are looking at lifting some of the sanctions. They need some encouragement in exchange for their further step, let's say, to arm some of the weapons over there. Yeah.
Bruce, you want to tackle some of that?
Yeah, of course, under UN sanctions, 11 of them, North Korea is required not only to not test, but to abandon its nuclear, missile, and biological chemical warfare programs in a complete, verifiable, irreversible manner. So the continued existence every day of the nuclear and missile programs are themselves a violation. So, and North Korea had said they no longer need to test nuclear weapons or missiles because they've successfully completed their ICBM and their nuclear warhead program. So abandoning the two missile sites, or I'm sorry, the two test sites, really isn't a significant step. And of course, they did it without international inspection. So I think the U.S. is looking for, putting meat to the bare bones of the Singapore summit. It is correct. It's only a page or less so. So, it's very disappointing. I think what we need to do is have more detailed, carefully crafted agreements like we did with the Soviet Union on arms control. So we need to move beyond the 8 failed agreements in the past with North Korea, which were always very short, very vague, and didn't have sufficient verification.
Yeah, and Professor Han Park, when we look at this, I mean, sometimes we need a reminder of the big picture. It is about a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. This is not about bringing democracy to North Korea or about human rights in North Korea, although those issues are sort of folded in as sub-chapters. At the heart of it all, nobody wants a nuclear exchange. After all these months, and we've had you on the show multiple times, you've seen Kim Jong-un at these multiple summits, and you've been able to gather a reading on the young man as he compares to his father and his grandfather. Are you convinced that he wants to give up his nuclear weapons, Han Park?
No. I think we waited. The world has waited too long. North Korea has crossed the bridge of no return. North Korea has nuclear technology, scientists, science, raw material, the experience. So even if they give up completely, irreversibly, they will become a nuclear producer once again within a short period of time. So they are announcing that they're going to give up nuclear weapons because they have nuclear capability already. So the world has waited too long. We don't know how to deal with maybe non-proliferation, maybe all we can get. But this denuclearization, we have to be very empirically, scientifically examine the feasibility, the desirability even of it, given the current situation.
Okay, that's fascinating because, Bruce, Han Park is usually the most dovish character we've ever had on this program when we discuss this, and he's saying we've passed a point where giving up nukes completely, or at least the knowledge to make them, is old news now. We've moved beyond that. So what does Washington do then? I mean, ultimately, you're going to have to live with a nuclear North Korea in some form, right?
Well, I don't think we just throw up our hands in defeat and say, all right, let's rip up 11 UN Security Council resolutions. Let's really rip up the Non-Proliferation Treaty and decades of U.S. Policy against proliferation. North Korea already proliferated nuclear materials when they were helping build a reactor in Syria. So I don't think we can just say, well, you guys won. You can keep your nuclear weapons. You can be a threat to your neighbors and to the United States. We can't just do that. I think the UN resolutions mean more than that.
Okay, so what do you do?
Well, I think we continue to have a comprehensive integrated strategy using all the instruments of national power. I think the problem is the Trump administration has played several different cards poorly. We should have diplomacy, but not, I think, the flawed techniques that the Trump administration has used. Also, you maintain pressure until the actions which triggered the responding sanctions have been ameliorated. Trump says we have maximum pressure. We don't. There, as he said, 300 North Korean entities that we're not sanctioning, which are violating U.S. law because of the interests of diplomacy. Also, I think Trump has mishandled the relationship with our South Korean ally. I think that relationship is strained. So there are a number of other factors. And also, I think we do need to continue focusing on human rights, whether it's part of the nuclear negotiations or not. This is a country that the UN has deemed committing crimes against humanity. I think that's something we can't just ignore.
Han Park, Bruce is saying that you don't need new thinking. You just need to follow through with the existing thinking and the existing policies. Do you agree with that?
No, the existing policies have never worked, have never been productive.
Including
the
South
current
Korea's.
policy simply is a waste of time. It is so important for North Korea to have the motivation to give up their nuclear arsenals. They do not have that motivation. Now with new South Korea, North Korea is encouraged to maintain current policy. So we have uphill battle. I'd like to see denuclearize Korean Peninsula, but the method, the pathway is very, very difficult. We have tested, experienced setbacks one after another. So I'm not very optimistic about maintaining current policy whatsoever.
Shu Kendwo, from Western eyes, a lot of people look at the Chinese and say that, hold on for a second. So a lot of people look at the Chinese and they say, yes, we know that North Korea is in your neighborhood and you don't want a flood of refugees over your border. And we understand that you need to be sensitive to all of this. But for as long as China treats North Korea as a little brother, and for as long as China continues to do business with North Korea, then sanctions are tepid at best, and any pressure doesn't really mean much because the North Koreans always have the Chinese option. Address that for me.
This is a very pessimistic view, and also there's a lack of understanding, obviously. If you have such kind of a view, people should understand that, yes, North Korea and China are close friends and also immediate neighbors. But remember, no country likes to have a nuclear-armed country like North Korea just beside you. So for China, China shares the goal of the United States. This is something, the common ground between the two countries. This is something they have been working together. And that's why China endorsed the UN resolution to impose sanctions on North Korea. China has made it officially very clear. China will not accept a nuclear-armed North Korea because this hurts China's national interests. This destabilizes Northeast Asia. This creates a lot of trouble. So China has been supporting the dialogue, has been supporting North Korea efforts, the U.S. efforts to solve their problem. Look, I disagree with some of the ideas by my colleague. I think now we are having a opportunity, a very important opportunity. Yes, the first meeting is just less than 1 page long, but look at what kind of atmosphere we have now. It's quite optimistic, I would say. Despite all the impasse, despite all this, lack of progress over the past month, you can see Kim Jong-un has made it very clear during the New Year speech. He's committed to denuclearization. He's ready to give up nuclear weapons, and he's ready not to proliferate the nuclear weapons. He's looking forward to a summit with Donald Trump. And of course, they need to work out what's the procedure, what's the detailed, roadmap for the next steps. This is something they need to work out. And the U.S. side is something like, we are waiting for your complete destruction of your nuclear weapons, and then we will do something. I think this attitude or this policy is unrealistic. The U.S. side should give the North Korean side some encouragement by doing something like lifting part of the sanction to encourage the government to do more. I think that probably is the right approach.
Bruce?
Well, people say remove some sanctions. Well, those are U.S. laws, and they're not only related to denuclearization. So, when people say remove the sanctions, are those the ones that are related to human rights violations? Are they the ones related to felony crimes such as money laundering? Are they the sanctions related to North Korea's counterfeiting of U.S. currency? Are they the sanctions related to North Korea being a state sponsor of terrorism? Is it okay if North Korea supports terrorist activity? Is it okay if North Korea violates U.S. laws protecting our financial system? So it's not as easy as just slicing off 5, 10, 8% of sanctions. So, with North Korea, we're looking for a dialogue, and they were the ones that canceled the meeting with Secretary of State Pompeo. They're the ones that have refused for months to have any meetings with Special Envoy Began. So, as has been true in the past under previous administrations, the U.S. is looking for dialogue,
look,
and North Korea has refused it.
Since the summit, what has the U.S. done to encourage the progress, to encourage more progress, let's say? I mean,
we've canceled,
except for the temporary suspension of this military exercise with South Korea. I mean, okay, North Korea is looking for a peace declaration, say the normalization of a diplomatic approach with the United States. If you look at the U.S. media, even a summit meeting, people in the U.S. would view a summit meeting as an award to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. I think that kind of attitudes, from Asia, from countries here in this region, we see that kind of attitudes is a bit like unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to solve the problem, you have to talk to each other.
Okay.
I mean, what's wrong with having a summit?
Fair question, Bruce.
Right. So the U.S. has canceled 9 military exercises with our ally, either unilaterally or bilateral military exercises. That's caused no change in North Korean behavior. North Korea continues, we see from satellite imagery, to expand and refine its production facilities for nuclear warheads, re-entry vehicles, missile launchers, missiles, and fissile material. We've seen that North Korea, the ball is in North Korea's court. They are the one in violation of UN resolutions, not the United States, not South Korea. So Began is trying to get meetings. North Korea refuses.
Okay. Just before we wrap up, Han Park, if and when that follow-up to Singapore happens, and there's another summit and there's another photo op, beyond the photo op and beyond the symbolism of a sitting US president and Kim Jong-un shaking hands and smiling, are you optimistic that something good can come out of it?
Yes, if the United States is willing to consider withdrawing some of the sanctions, if the United States is willing to work with Pyongyang for eventual peace treaty and diplomatic normalization, then North Korea will come out with a clean hand. They will give up their weapons, although they know that they can go back and produce again. But existing facilities, weapons, and everything, they will give up.
Okay.
So we have to work toward that.
Okay, that would be historic, and we certainly won't go out of business in this industry, and we'll have you all back on the show to discuss that. But gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to you all once again. Han Park, Bruce Klingner, and Shu Kin-Duo. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. In Germany, Muslims may soon have to pay for their beliefs. Angela Merkel's ruling Christian Democratic Union says it's considering introducing a so-called mosque tax to be paid by Muslim citizens. The aim? To counter extremism and foreign influence. Many mosques in Germany rely on foreign donors, with a significant amount of money coming from the Turkish Islamic Union for religious affairs. So, how would it work? Well, similar legislation already exists for Christians. Registered Catholics and Protestants pay the state, which then uses the money to fund church activities. The same would apply for Muslims. But it raises the question, should someone be taxed for their faith? Well, let's ask Zafer Messe. He's the General Coordinator for the Berlin office of the Turkish think tank SETA. Thanks for joining us once again, Zafer. There is a similar policy for Christians. They want Muslims to pay the state, and that money will go towards Islamic affairs, and it can be controlled. What's your problem with it?
Well, I have not a problem with this mosque tax, but the Turkish communities, they're trying since 20 years to apply for the mosque tax, and not directly to apply for the mosque tax, but for, there is a statute, they need to have a legal statute, which the Christian churches, they have. It is called the public entity, and since 20 years, the organized institutions of the majority Muslim communities, they're trying it, and they failed on the court. And the politics, the policymakers were not willing until recently to even discuss the implementation or to provide the Muslim communities this very privileged status. That's
okay,
now
so,
on the table, yeah, on the ground.
So,
in addition to very the tax, surprising.
Okay,
yeah.
So interesting. So, in addition to the tax, you're okay with the tax, but you want the Muslim community to have the same privileged status as churches. Am I hearing you right?
But you know, no. Let me explain it again. Because if you want to have to collect mosque tax, then you have to have this public entity status.
Okay.
That means the Muslim community, they are trying since years. That's the issue. My problem is the narrative with the politicians approaching the issue of the mosque tax.
Okay, so why don't they want to give the public entity status? What is the
topic?
Sorry, okay, well, yeah, 1 second, Zafar. So why don't they give the public entity status? What's the resistance?
Okay, let me explain why it is important to have it. That's why you will understand why they are resisting. The church tax is something similar. It's collected in Germany to finance the expenditures of religious and ideological communities. And it is collected by the tax office of the related state. According to the constitution, it will be a public entity. You know, none of the Muslim organizations have it. Now all and the privileges are very, very let's say attractive for the communities, because they are the motivation or the philosophy of the public entity is for the churches to be let's say autark in their financing, in their services, to be not under pressure from the state. It was because of the experience from the Nazi regime and the late time of the Weimar Republic. But now what we have is when Christian Democrats and others are now are also demanding a tax, mosque tax, they have two intentions. First is that so they think they can prevent the funding of these communities, financing funding from foundations, from Islamic foundations in abroad. And right. As you rightly said, DITIB is one of the biggest community they have organization here. They have more than or approximately 900 mosques, and this is the real reason. The second reason is that the politicians and the bureaucracy, they have on their agenda to, let's say, have a different understanding of Islam, right. The German Islam, part of the discussion of the European Islam.
Certainly.
Yes.
Allow me to pick up on that for a second. So when they say they want an independent German Islam, they're not saying from the CDU that we want to review the Jummah khutbahs and we want to write it for you and we want to push out propaganda, right? What they're saying is there's some problematic stuff coming in from funding from the Gulf and elsewhere. It's creating a problem within some of the mosques, and some of it has been well documented. And so we want to better control this, and we want the German Muslims themselves to create their own German Muslim identity. I don't think you can fully disagree with that, can you?
Okay, I mean, no, it's not the point. Come on. I mean, why Germany is irritated that imams are coming from Germany, from Turkey for a period of time? I mean, who is sending the cardinals or the bishops to Germany? It's Germany? No, it's the Vatican. You know, and it's the Catholic Church. So what we have to go back to the principal matters. It's the German constitution, you know, because the German constitutions, there is a reason why the founding fathers prioritized let's say, the human dignity and the freedom of belief in Article 1, 2, 3, 4. And the issue is, of course, you can provide a legal status. That's what also we are asking for in Germany as Muslims. But on the other hand, don't interfere in our theological and in the interpretation of our belief, as you are not doing it for the other, the Protestant or the Catholic Church as well. This is the state is neutral when it comes to religious interference or intervention in issues. And we have it in discussions. We have it in the public debate, in the discourse on Islam in Germany. And every day you can really see someone who is really breaching the article in the German constitution. The human dignity is not violable. You cannot, let's say, insult the human being's dignity. That's something Muslims are facing in Germany. Not because the others are some kind of, let's say, having something against something else, but according to their belief, they are sometimes in the discourse, in a situation where they have not the rights or not able to defend themselves, and then will be, let's say, their dignity will be violated.
Okay.
That's the issue.
Okay.
That's something different from the mosque tax. Mosque tax, we need it definitely.
Okay. Zafir Mesa,
but
good to talk to you.
the intention of the politicians, yes.
Yeah, you doubt their intentions, and that's at the crux of it all here. It's been good to have you on the Newsmakers again. Thanks for joining us, Zafir. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, we debate the future of Venezuela as President Maduro begins a new 6-year term amid growing international condemnation. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.